The small-town girl Sarah Martinez grew up in the quiet town of Cedar Falls, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her grandmother lived 3 houses down from her family's small ranch-style home, and every Sunday after church, they would gather around the kitchen table for her grandmother's famous apple pie. Sarah was the youngest of 3 children with 2 older brothers who towered over her petite, 5'2" frame. At 17, Sarah looked even younger than her age. Her round cheeks and bright brown eyes made strangers guess she was barely 15. Her mother often joked that Sarah could still pass for a middle schooler when she put her hair in pigtails. The local grocery store clerk still asked to see her ID when she tried to buy energy drinks, even though they had known her since she was in diapers. Despite her youthful appearance, Sarah had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, Sarah preferred hiking in the nearby mountains with her grandfather, who had served in Vietnam. He taught her how to read maps, tie knots, and survive in the wilderness. Her bedroom walls were covered not with posters of pop stars, but with pictures of military aircraft and maps of different countries. Her grandfather, Roberto, was her hero. He rarely talked about his time in the war, but Sarah knew he had been decorated for his service. Sometimes late at night when he thought no one was listening, she would hear him talking to her grandmother about the friends he had lost and the missions that still haunted his dreams. Sarah would sit quietly at the top of the stairs, absorbing every word, feeling a pull toward something she couldn't quite name. In high school, Sarah excelled in her ROTC program. While other students treated it as an easy credit, Sarah took every exercise seriously. She memorized military history, practiced drill commands until they were perfect, and often stayed after school to help younger students with their uniforms and procedures. Her instructor, Sergeant Williams, noticed her dedication immediately. During her junior year, Sarah's best friend Emma started dating a college boy who lived 2 towns over. Emma began skipping their weekend hiking trips to spend time with her new boyfriend, leaving Sarah feeling increasingly isolated. Her brothers were both away at college, and her parents were busy managing their small accounting business. Sarah found herself spending more time with her grandfather, listening to his stories and learning about military strategy and history. One evening in late spring, as Sarah and her grandfather sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, he turned to her with a serious expression. "You know, mija, you remind me of myself when I was your age. Always looking beyond these mountains, wondering what's out there." Sarah nodded, feeling understood in a way she rarely experienced with her peers. "I've been thinking about enlisting after graduation," Sarah admitted quietly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She had been carrying this secret for months, afraid to voice it even to herself. Her grandfather was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly in his weathered wooden chair. "The military changes you," he finally said, his voice heavy with experience. "It shows you things about yourself you never knew existed. Some good, some not so good. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility?" Sarah looked out at the familiar landscape of her childhood, feeling both terrified and excited by the possibility of leaving it all behind. The next morning, Sarah researched different military branches on the school library computers. She read about training programs, deployment schedules, and career opportunities. The Army appealed to her because of the variety of specializations available, but she was also drawn to the Marines because of their reputation for toughness and elite training. She printed out information packets and hid them in her backpack, not ready to share her plans with anyone else yet. At lunch that day, Emma noticed Sarah seemed distracted. "You've been weird lately," Emma said, picking at her cafeteria pizza. "Are you okay? You barely talked to me all week." Sarah wanted to tell her best friend about her military dreams, but she knew Emma wouldn't understand. Emma's biggest concern was whether her boyfriend would ask her to prom, while Sarah was contemplating a future that might involve combat zones and life or death decisions. That weekend, Sarah's family hosted their monthly barbecue for relatives and close family friends. As always, the men gathered around the grill while the women chatted in the kitchen. Sarah found herself caught between both groups, not quite fitting in with either. Her Aunt Rosa was discussing her daughter's upcoming wedding, while her Uncle Miguel was debating sports statistics with Sarah's father, Commander Thompson, a family friend who worked at the nearby military recruitment office, arrived late with his wife and 2 young children. Sarah had known him since she was little, but had never really paid attention to his military background. As he helped her father flip burgers, she overheard him talking about his recent deployment and the young recruits he worked with daily. Most of these kids don't know what they're getting into, Commander Thompson said, shaking his head. They watch too many movies and think military service is all about glory and heroics. The reality is much different. Sarah moved closer, pretending to help her mother carry drinks outside while listening intently to his conversation. Later that evening, as the family cleaned up paper plates and folded tables, Sarah approached Commander Thompson as he loaded his children into their car seats. "Commander Thompson, could I ask you something about military service?" she said, trying to sound casual despite her racing heart. He looked at her with surprise, taking in her small frame and youthful face. A smile played at the corners of his mouth as he glanced at his own daughter, who was about Sarah's size and age. "Sure, sweetheart, but aren't you a little young to be thinking about such serious things? You look just like my granddaughter Emma. She's more interested in boys and shopping than military service." The comparison stung more than Sarah expected. She straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "I'm 17, sir, and I'll be graduating next year. I've been in ROTC for 3 years, and I'm serious about serving my country." Her voice was steady despite the flush she felt creeping up her neck. Commander Thompson's expression shifted slightly, but the condescending smile remained. "Well, that's admirable, honey. But military service is extremely demanding, both physically and mentally. It's not like the movies or video games. Have you considered other ways to serve your community? Maybe teaching or nursing?" Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to remain polite. "I understand it's challenging, sir. That's exactly why I want to do it. I believe I have something to contribute." Commander Thompson nodded absently, clearly not taking her seriously, and finished buckling his daughter into her car seat. As his family drove away, Sarah stood in her driveway feeling a mixture of determination and frustration burning in her chest. She would show him, and everyone else who underestimated her, exactly what she was capable of. That night, she filled out her first military application, her grandfather's war stories echoing in her mind as she wrote about her motivations for service. The decision that changed everything, the weeks following Sarah's conversation with Commander Thompson, were filled with secret research and careful planning. She spent her lunch periods in the school library, reading military blogs and forums where current service members shared their experiences. She learned about different military occupational specialties, deployment rotations, and the realities of military life that recruitment videos didn't show. Her ROTC instructor, Sergeant Williams, noticed her increased interest during their weekly classes. After a particularly intensive drill session where Sarah had helped several struggling classmates perfect their formations, he asked her to stay after class. "Martinez, you've got natural leadership abilities," he said, organizing the equipment they had used. "Have you given any thought to military service after graduation?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This was the opening she had been hoping for, but she was nervous about revealing her plans too early. "I've been considering it, Sergeant. What do you think about someone like me in the military?" She gestured to her small frame, still feeling the sting of Commander Thompson's dismissive attitude. Sergeant Williams studied her carefully. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had seen soldiers of all shapes and sizes prove themselves in ways that defied expectations. "Martinez, I've learned that heart and determination matter more than physical size. Some of the best soldiers I served with were people others underestimated. What branch are you considering?" Over the next hour, Sarah and Sergeant Williams discussed her options in detail. He explained the differences between various Army specialties, the rigorous training programs, and the commitment required for military service. Unlike Commander Thompson, Sergeant Williams treated her questions seriously and provided honest, detailed answers about both the challenges and rewards of military life. That evening at dinner, Sarah's family was discussing her oldest brother Carlos's upcoming graduation from college. He had landed a job at a tech company in California and would be moving across the country within a month. Her middle brother Diego was finishing his sophomore year studying business, with plans to eventually take over their parents' accounting firm. "So what are your plans for after graduation, mija?" her father asked, passing the bowl of rice around the table. "Have you decided on a college yet?" Sarah's mother had been encouraging her to apply to the local state university, where she could study education or nursing and stay close to home. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would change everything. "Actually, I've been thinking about joining the Army." The silence that followed was deafening. Her fork clinked against her plate as she set it down, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. Her mother was the first to speak. "Sarah, don't be ridiculous. You're too young to make such a big decision. College first, then maybe we can talk about other options." Her father nodded in agreement while both brothers exchanged worried glances across the table. "I'm not too young," Sarah said firmly. "I'll be 18 in 3 months. I've been researching this for weeks and I've talked to Sergeant Williams about the opportunities available. I want to serve my country, and I want to prove that I can handle whatever challenges come my way." Her grandfather, who had been quietly eating his dinner, finally looked up. "Tell us about your research, Misha. What specifically interests you about military service?" His calm tone contrasted sharply with her parents' obvious distress, and Sarah felt grateful for his measured response. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah shared everything she had learned about Army career fields, training programs, and educational benefits. She talked about her desire to travel, to be part of something bigger than herself, and to follow in her grandfather's footsteps. Her family listened with a mixture of pride and concern, asking practical questions about safety, deployment schedules, and long-term career prospects. The conversation continued long after dinner ended, with her mother expressing fears about Sarah being in dangerous situations and her father worrying about the physical demands of military training. Her brothers, who had never shown much interest in military service themselves, seemed surprised by the depth of Sarah's knowledge and commitment to her decision. Over the following days, the house felt tense as her parents processed Sarah's announcement. Her mother alternated between trying to talk her out of enlisting and researching military policies herself, as if looking for reasons why Sarah's plan wouldn't work. Her father was more direct in his opposition, pointing out that she could serve her community in safer ways through civilian careers. The breakthrough came when Sarah's grandfather asked her to join him for their regular evening walk around the neighborhood. As they strolled past houses where she had grown up playing with neighborhood children, he shared more details about his own military experience than he had ever revealed before. "When I was 19, people told me I was too young, too inexperienced, too naive to handle combat," he said, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as they walked. "But the military taught me discipline, courage, and how to work as part of a team. It also showed me parts of myself I never would have discovered otherwise." He paused at the corner where they usually turned back toward home. "Your parents are scared because they love you. But I see something in you that reminds me of myself at that age. A need to test your limits and prove your capabilities. If this is truly what you want, I'll support you." With her grandfather's backing, Sarah felt more confident about pursuing her military dreams. She began the formal application process, taking the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery and meeting with recruiters to discuss her options. Her scores were high enough to qualify for several competitive specialties, including military intelligence and communications. The recruiting station was located in a strip mall between a sandwich shop and a cell phone store. Sarah felt nervous as she walked through the glass doors, wondering if the recruiters would take her seriously or dismiss her like Commander Thompson had. Staff Sergeant Rivera greeted her warmly and spent over an hour reviewing her test scores and discussing potential career paths. "You have excellent scores, Martinez," he said, reviewing her paperwork. "With grades like these, you could qualify for some of our most challenging programs. What interests you most about military service?" Sarah appreciated that he asked about her motivations rather than questioning whether she was tough enough for military life. As she left the recruiting station that day, with a folder full of information and application materials, Sarah felt both excited and terrified about the path she was choosing. She knew the next few months would be challenging as she navigated her family's concerns, completed her high school requirements, and prepared for the biggest change of her life. That night, she called her best friend Emma to share her news. Emma's reaction was predictable: shock, confusion, and concern about Sarah's safety. "But you're so small," Emma said, echoing the concerns Sarah had heard from others. "And you've never been away from home for more than a week. Are you sure about this?" Sarah looked out her bedroom window at the familiar mountains that had surrounded her entire life. Soon she would trade this view for unknown landscapes and experiences she could barely imagine. "I'm sure," she said quietly. "This is what I need to do." Basic training and beyond, the bus ride to Fort Benning, Georgia, took 14 hours from Sarah's hometown. She sat pressed against the window, watching familiar landscapes give way to unfamiliar terrain as the miles rolled past. Her backpack contained the few personal items she was allowed to bring: a photo of her family, a letter from her grandfather, and the small silver cross her grandmother had pressed into her hands at the airport. Around her, other young recruits chatted nervously or slept fitfully against the worn bus seats. Sarah studied her fellow passengers, trying to guess who would succeed and who would struggle with the challenges ahead. Most were young men who looked confident and eager. A few other women were scattered throughout the bus, and Sarah noticed she was probably the smallest person making this journey. When the bus finally pulled up to the reception station at Fort Benning, drill sergeants immediately began shouting instructions at the exhausted new arrivals. Sarah had expected this from her research, but the reality was still overwhelming. The noise, the confusion, and the immediate pressure to move quickly and follow orders precisely made her head spin. "Martinez!" a drill sergeant shouted, reading from his clipboard. "You sure you're in the right place, kid? This isn't summer camp." Several other recruits snickered, and Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. She straightened her shoulders and looked the drill sergeant directly in the eye. "Yes, drill sergeant, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied in the strongest voice she could manage. The drill sergeant studied her for a moment, then moved on to the next recruit without comment. Sarah's hands were shaking, but she had passed her first test. The first weeks of basic training were the hardest thing Sarah had ever experienced. The physical demands pushed her small body to its limits and beyond. During morning runs, she often fell behind the longer-legged recruits, forcing herself to sprint to catch up while her lungs burned and her legs felt like lead. The drill sergeants showed no mercy, constantly reminding her that she needed to work twice as hard to keep up with her male counterparts. But Sarah had advantages that weren't immediately obvious. Years of hiking with her grandfather had given her excellent endurance, and her small size actually helped during obstacle courses that required crawling through tight spaces or climbing over barriers. More importantly, her determination never wavered even when her body wanted to quit. Her bunkmate, Jessica Chen from Seattle, became her closest ally during those challenging weeks. Jessica was taller and stronger than Sarah, but she struggled with the academic portions of their training. In the evenings, after long days of physical training and classroom instruction, Sarah would help Jessica study military regulations and tactical procedures, while Jessica shared tips for improving Sarah's performance during fitness tests. The turning point came during their third week, during a particularly brutal training exercise in the Georgia heat. The recruits were required to carry heavy packs over several miles of rough terrain while completing various tasks along the way. Sarah's pack weighed nearly half as much as she did, and within the first mile she was falling behind the main group. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez noticed Sarah struggling and fell into step beside her. "Martinez, you can quit anytime you want," he said conversationally as she labored under the weight of her equipment. "Nobody would blame a little girl like you for washing out. This isn't a job for someone your size." Sarah gritted her teeth and kept walking. Her shoulders ached, her feet were developing blisters, and sweat was pouring down her face despite the cooling evening air. But something inside her refused to give up. She thought about Commander Thompson's dismissive smile, her parents' worried faces, and her grandfather's stories about overcoming impossible odds. "I'm not quitting, Drill Sergeant," she managed to say between labored breaths. "I'll finish this exercise if I have to crawl across the finish line." Drill Sergeant Rodriguez said nothing more, but Sarah noticed he stayed beside her for the rest of the exercise, occasionally offering tactical advice about managing her equipment load. When Sarah finally completed the exercise, she was among the last to finish, but far from the last. Two larger male recruits had dropped out entirely, unable to handle the mental pressure combined with physical exhaustion. As Sarah crossed the finish line, she collapsed onto the ground, completely spent but victorious. That night in the barracks, several recruits who had previously ignored Sarah approached her with new respect. Marcus Williams, a former high school football player from Texas, offered to share some of his extra energy bars. "I saw what you did out there today," he said quietly. "That took serious guts." Word of Sarah's determination began to spread among the training staff as well. During weapons training, she proved to be an excellent marksman, her small frame actually providing stability that helped her accuracy. Her attention to detail during equipment maintenance and her ability to help struggling classmates with academic material earned positive attention from instructors. By the halfway point of basic training, Sarah had transformed from the uncertain teenager who stepped off the bus into a confident young soldier. She had gained muscle mass despite her small frame, and her endurance had improved dramatically. More importantly, she had earned the respect of her peers and instructors through consistent performance and unwavering determination. The graduation ceremony was everything Sarah had dreamed it would be. Her entire family made the trip to Georgia to watch her receive her Army insignia and complete the transformation from civilian to soldier. Her parents, who had spent months worrying about their daughter's safety and well-being, were amazed by the confident young woman who marched in formation with her fellow graduates. Commander Thompson was also there, representing the local military community at the invitation of Sarah's family. When he saw Sarah in her dress uniform, standing tall despite her small stature, his expression was one of genuine surprise and respect. After the ceremony, he approached her family with an apologetic smile. "I owe you an apology," he said to Sarah directly. "I clearly underestimated your potential and your commitment. Congratulations on your graduation. You've proven that determination matters more than size." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, though she couldn't help feeling satisfied that she had proven his initial assessment wrong. Following basic training, Sarah was selected for advanced individual training in military intelligence, a competitive field that required high test scores and security clearance. Her destination was Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where she would spend several months learning skills that could eventually take her anywhere in the world. As she said goodbye to her basic training friends and prepared for the next phase of her military journey, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed in just a few months. The uncertain teenager who had researched military careers in secret was gone, replaced by a confident soldier ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind as she boarded the plane for Arizona. "The military shows you parts of yourself you never knew existed." Sarah was beginning to understand exactly what he had meant, and she was eager to discover what other capabilities she possessed that had yet to be tested. First deployment Fort Huachuca, Arizona, was a dramatic change from the humid heat of Georgia. The desert landscape reminded Sarah of home, though the training at the intelligence school was far more intense than anything she had experienced during basic training. Here she learned to analyze satellite imagery, intercept communications, and piece together information that could save lives or prevent enemy attacks. Sarah excelled in her coursework, particularly in language analysis and pattern recognition. Her instructors noted her ability to spot details that others missed, and her talent for synthesizing complex information into clear, actionable intelligence reports. By the time she completed her training, she had been selected for an advanced program that would prepare her for deployment to active combat zones. Her first assignment was to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, where she would work as part of a small intelligence team supporting combat operations. The base, designated FOB Apache, was located in a volatile region where Taliban forces frequently attacked coalition troops. Sarah's job would be to monitor enemy communications and provide early warning of potential threats. The flight to Afghanistan took over 20 hours, with stops in Germany and Qatar. Sarah used the long journey to study briefing materials about her new assignment and the current security situation in her area of operations. She learned about the local terrain, recent enemy activities, and the American and Afghan forces she would be supporting. When she finally arrived at FOB Apache, Sarah was struck by how different it looked from the military bases she had trained at in the United States. The base was surrounded by high concrete walls topped with razor wire, and guard towers provided constant surveillance of the surrounding area. The buildings were mostly prefabricated structures that looked temporary, as if they could be packed up and moved at any time. Captain Morrison, the intelligence team leader, greeted Sarah at the helicopter landing zone. He was a tall, weathered officer in his early 30s who had already completed 2 previous deployments to Afghanistan. As they walked toward the Intelligence Operations Center, he briefed her on the current threat situation and her specific responsibilities. "Martinez, I'll be honest with you," Captain Morrison said as they entered the secure facility where she would be working. "This is a dangerous assignment. We've lost 2 intelligence analysts in the past year to rocket attacks and improvised explosive devices. The enemy knows how important our work is, and they try to target our operations whenever possible." The operations center was a windowless building filled with computer monitors, communication equipment, and maps covered in pins marking known enemy positions. Sarah's workstation was equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds from various sources. Within hours of her arrival, she was analyzing intercepted radio communications and tracking suspicious vehicle movements in the surrounding area. Her first few weeks at FOB Apache were relatively quiet, allowing Sarah to adjust to the rhythm of deployment life. She worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, monitoring enemy communications and preparing intelligence briefings for combat units preparing to leave the base. During her off-duty hours, she wrote emails to her family, exercised in the small base gym, and tried to catch up on sleep despite the frequent sound of helicopters and occasional mortar attacks. The first time the base came under direct attack, Sarah was working a night shift when the alarm sirens began wailing. "Incoming! Incoming!" echoed over the base loudspeakers as mortar rounds began falling near the perimeter. Sarah's training kicked in immediately, and she continued monitoring her intelligence feeds even as explosions shook the building around her. "Martinez, get to the bunker," Captain Morrison shouted over the noise of the attack. But Sarah had noticed something important on her communications intercept system. Enemy fighters were coordinating their attack through radio communications, and she was tracking their positions in real time. "Sir, I've got their location," Sarah called back, her fingers flying over her keyboard as she plotted the enemy positions on her map display. "They're firing from compound Delta 7, approximately 2 kilometers southeast of our position." Her information was immediately passed to the base's counter-battery radar team, who were able to return accurate fire within minutes. The attack lasted only 20 minutes, but it marked a turning point in Sarah's deployment experience. Word of her performance under fire spread quickly throughout the base, earning her respect from infantry soldiers who had initially been skeptical of the young intelligence analyst, who looked barely old enough to drive. Over the following months, Sarah's work proved increasingly valuable to the combat units operating from FOB Apache. Her ability to track enemy movements and predict attack patterns helped prevent numerous casualties among American and Afghan forces. She developed a reputation for staying calm under pressure and providing accurate, timely intelligence even during the most chaotic situations. The closest call came during her 6th month of deployment. Sarah was conducting a routine analysis of enemy communications when she detected unusual radio traffic, indicating a large-scale attack was being planned against the base. The communications were fragmented and coded, but Sarah recognized patterns that suggested the attack would come from multiple directions simultaneously. She immediately alerted Captain Morrison, who convened an emergency meeting with the base commander and senior staff. Based on Sarah's analysis, they determined that the base would likely be attacked within the next few hours by a coordinated force of at least 50 enemy fighters. This was far larger than any previous attack the base had experienced. The base went into immediate high alert status. Additional security positions were manned, and helicopter gunships were called in to provide close air support. Sarah continued monitoring enemy communications from the operations center, providing real-time updates on enemy movements and intentions as the attack developed. When the attack finally began, it was even more intense than Sarah's analysis had predicted. Enemy fighters attacked from 3 different directions, using rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, and small arms fire in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the base's defenses. The battle lasted for over 4 hours, with Sarah providing continuous intelligence updates that helped direct defensive fire and coordinate air support. At one point during the fight, a rocket-propelled grenade struck the operations center, damaging several pieces of equipment and injuring 2 other analysts. Sarah was thrown to the floor by the explosion, suffering cuts from flying debris and temporary hearing loss from the blast. Despite her injuries, she continued working, manually tracking enemy positions on paper maps when her computer systems failed. Her work that night directly contributed to the successful defense of the base and likely saved dozens of American lives. The base commander, Colonel Richards, personally commended her performance and recommended her for a Bronze Star Medal for her actions under fire. At 20 years old, Sarah had proven herself in combat in a way that silenced any remaining doubts about her capabilities. As news of the attack and Sarah's performance reached her family back home, they began to understand the reality of their daughter's military service in a new way. Her mother, who had worried constantly about Sarah's safety, felt both proud and terrified as she read news reports about the battle. Her grandfather, meanwhile, felt a deep sense of pride knowing that his granddaughter had proven herself worthy of the family's military tradition. Word of Sarah's performance also reached Commander Thompson back home. When he learned about her Bronze Star recommendation, he felt a mixture of admiration and regret about his initial dismissive attitude toward the young woman who had approached him at a family barbecue. He began to understand that courage and capability came in many different forms, not all of them immediately obvious. The mission that changed everything. After 8 months at FOB Apache, Sarah had established herself as one of the most capable intelligence analysts in her unit. Her combination of technical skills and combat experience made her invaluable for the most challenging assignments. When Captain Morrison received orders for a classified mission that would require his best analyst, he didn't hesitate to select Sarah for the task. The mission involved embedding with a special forces team that was conducting operations deep in Taliban-controlled territory. Sarah's job would be to provide real-time intelligence analysis during a multi-day operation designed to capture a high-value target who had been coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. The Special Forces team leader, Major Jackson, was initially skeptical about bringing a young female analyst on such a dangerous mission. Sarah could see his doubt during their first briefing, though he was professional enough not to voice his concerns directly. The rest of his team, seasoned Green Berets with multiple combat deployments, seemed equally uncertain about her presence. Martinez, "This isn't going to be like working from the safety of the base," Major Jackson explained as they reviewed satellite imagery of their target area. "We'll be operating in extremely hostile territory for 72 hours, possibly longer. If we encounter enemy forces, you'll need to be able to fight as well as analyze intelligence. Are you prepared for that level of risk?" Sarah looked around the room at the experienced soldiers who would be depending on her analysis to keep them alive. She understood the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "Yes, sir. I'm ready," she replied firmly. "My intelligence assessments have been accurate in every previous operation, and I won't let the team down." The mission launched before dawn on a Tuesday morning. Sarah rode in the lead Humvee with Major Jackson and his communications specialist, surrounded by armored vehicles carrying the rest of the Special Forces team. As they left the relative safety of FOB Apache, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror about the dangers ahead. Their destination was a remote village where intelligence sources indicated the target was hiding in a compound surrounded by loyal fighters. The journey would take them through several areas where coalition forces had been attacked in recent months, including a narrow mountain pass that was known for improvised explosive device attacks. Sarah spent the journey monitoring radio communications and studying real-time intelligence feeds on her portable equipment. She identified several potential threats along their route and was able to warn the convoy about suspicious vehicle movements that could indicate an ambush. Her warnings allowed the team to adjust their route and avoid what later proved to be a planned attack. When they reached their staging area, an abandoned building several kilometers from the target village, Sarah set up her equipment and began intensive surveillance of the target compound. Using a combination of electronic intercepts, drone footage, and human intelligence reports, she built a detailed picture of the enemy's defensive preparations. "Major, I'm seeing increased radio traffic around the target location," Sarah reported during their first evening in the field. "Based on the communication patterns, I estimate there are between 15 and 20 fighters in the compound, with at least 3 more providing security in the surrounding area. They're definitely expecting trouble." Major Jackson studied Sarah's analysis carefully. Her assessment matched what his own reconnaissance team had observed, but provided additional details that would be crucial for planning their assault. "What about escape routes?" he asked. "If our target decides to run, where would he go?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had prepared detailed maps showing likely escape routes based on the terrain and enemy communication patterns. "There are 3 possible routes, sir," she explained, pointing to her annotated maps. "But based on the radio chatter I've intercepted, I think he's most likely to use this northern route that leads to a second compound where he has additional support." The assault was scheduled for the next morning. Just before dawn, when the enemy guards would be least alert, Sarah would remain at the staging area to provide intelligence, support, and coordinate with air assets that would be standing by in case the team needed emergency extraction as the Special Forces soldiers prepared their equipment for the mission. Sarah continued monitoring enemy communications. Just 2 hours before the scheduled assault, she detected radio traffic that made her blood run cold. The enemy had somehow learned about the operation and was preparing an ambush for the American forces. "Major Jackson, we have a problem," Sarah called urgently. "The enemy knows we're here. They're setting up positions to attack us when we move toward the target compound." She quickly plotted the enemy positions on her map and calculated the best way to avoid the ambush. Major Jackson gathered his team leaders for an emergency planning session. Based on Sarah's intelligence, they decided to modify their approach route and delay the assault until they could neutralize the ambush positions. Sarah's timely warning had likely saved the entire team from walking into a deadly trap. The revised mission was even more complex than the original plan. The team would have to eliminate the ambush positions before moving on the primary target, requiring precise coordination and split-second timing. Sarah would play a crucial role, providing real-time updates on enemy movements and helping coordinate the multiple phases of the operation. When the assault finally began, everything seemed to go wrong at once. The team successfully neutralized the ambush positions, but enemy reinforcements arrived much faster than expected. Within minutes, the Special Forces soldiers found themselves surrounded and engaged in intense firefights on multiple fronts. From her position at the staging area, Sarah could hear the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing across the valley. Radio communications were chaotic, with multiple teams calling for support and reporting casualties. Sarah worked frantically to track enemy movements and coordinate air support, but the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Martinez, we need immediate extraction." Major Jackson's voice crackled over the radio. "We're pinned down and taking heavy fire. Can you vector in close air support?" Sarah was already working with the helicopter pilots, guiding them toward enemy positions while trying to avoid hitting friendly forces in the confused battle. The fighting continued for over 3 hours, with Sarah serving as the crucial link between the ground forces and air support. Her ability to track multiple enemy units simultaneously and coordinate complex airstrikes while under extreme pressure proved invaluable to the mission's success. During the most intense phase of the battle, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. While monitoring enemy radio communications, she detected that the high-value target was attempting to escape using the exact route she had predicted. He was moving with a small security detail toward the northern compound, believing the American forces were too busy fighting to pursue him. "Major Jackson, the target is moving," Sarah transmitted urgently. "He's using the northern escape route with approximately 5 guards. If we can intercept him at grid coordinates 38 SMD 1123456, we can still complete the primary mission." Major Jackson's response was immediate. Despite being engaged in heavy fighting, he detached 2 of his soldiers to pursue the fleeing target. Sarah guided them through the terrain using real-time drone footage, helping them avoid enemy patrols and reach the intercept point just as the target's vehicle approached. The capture was swift and decisive. Sarah's precise intelligence had allowed the team to anticipate the target's movements and position themselves perfectly for the intercept. Within minutes, they had secured their primary objective and were preparing for extraction, while the remaining enemy forces continued fighting at the original compound. But the mission wasn't over yet. As the Special Forces team moved toward their extraction point with their prisoner, they came under attack from a previously unknown enemy position. Sarah watched in horror from her monitoring station as tracer rounds lit up the darkness around the American forces. Without hesitation, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Grabbing her weapon and a portable radio, she left the safety of her staging area and moved toward the sound of gunfire. She knew the team's exact position and could see enemy muzzle flashes that weren't visible to the engaged soldiers. "I'm moving to support," Sarah transmitted as she sprinted across the rocky terrain. "I can see enemy positions that are hidden from your location." Major Jackson tried to order her to stay back, but Sarah was already in motion, using her small size and knowledge of the terrain to approach the enemy position from an unexpected angle. Sarah's flanking maneuver caught the enemy fighters completely by surprise. Using the marksmanship skills she had perfected during training, she engaged the enemy position with precise, controlled fire that eliminated the immediate threat to the extraction team. Her actions allowed the Special Forces soldiers to break contact and reach their helicopter landing zone safely. As the helicopters lifted off with the captured target and the entire team safely aboard, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had not only provided crucial intelligence support throughout the mission, but had also directs. Rising through the ranks, Sarah's success on the Special Forces mission opened doors that few soldiers ever experienced. Within weeks of returning to FOB Apache, she received orders for assignment to a joint task force that conducted the military's most sensitive operations. At just 21 years old, she was being recognized as one of the Army's most promising young intelligence professionals. Her new assignment took her to a classified facility, where she worked alongside elite soldiers from all branches of the military, as well as intelligence professionals from various government agencies. The work was more complex and demanding than anything she had experienced, involving threats that could affect national security and operations that required absolute precision. Colonel Sarah Martinez, she could hardly believe how quickly she was advancing through the ranks, had become known for her ability to see patterns that others missed and her courage under fire. Her superiors began assigning her to increasingly important missions, including operations in multiple countries where American interests were threatened. During one particularly challenging assignment in a conflict zone that couldn't be publicly acknowledged, Sarah's team was tasked with gathering intelligence on a terrorist network that was planning attacks against American targets. The mission required her to work undercover in a major city, posing as a foreign journalist while secretly collecting information on enemy activities. The operation was Sarah's most dangerous assignment yet. Unlike her previous deployments where she had the protection of American military bases and fellow soldiers, this mission required her to operate alone in hostile territory, where discovery would likely mean death. Her small stature and youthful appearance, which had once been seen as disadvantages, now became valuable assets for her cover identity. For 3 months, Sarah lived as Maria Santos, a freelance journalist from Spain who was reporting on economic conditions in the region. She rented a small apartment, established relationships with local contacts, and gradually worked her way into circles where she could observe terrorist activities without arousing suspicion. The information she gathered was extraordinary. Sarah identified key members of the terrorist network, their communication methods, funding sources, and planned targets. Her intelligence reports, transmitted through secure channels back to her handlers, provided crucial information that prevented multiple attacks and led to the capture of several high-value targets, but the mission nearly cost Sarah her life when her cover was blown by an unexpected encounter with someone from her past. While attending a social gathering where she hoped to make contact with a suspected terrorist financier, she was recognized by a man who had once visited her hometown's military recruitment office years earlier. "Excuse me, but you look very familiar," the man said, approaching Sarah at the gathering.
"Have we met before?"
"You remind me of someone I knew in America." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the man was studying her face intently, trying to place where he had seen her before. Using her training in deception and misdirection, Sarah managed to convince the man that he was mistaken. She spoke only in Spanish, adopted mannerisms she had observed in Spanish journalists, and gradually moved away from him without appearing to flee. But she knew her time undercover was limited. If he remembered where he had seen her, her cover would be completely blown. Sarah immediately activated her emergency extraction procedures, but it would take 48 hours for her handlers to arrange safe passage out of the country. During those 2 critical days, she had to maintain her cover while knowing that enemy agents might be actively searching for her. The situation became even more dangerous when Sarah learned that the terrorist network had indeed been alerted to the presence of an American agent in their midst. Through careful surveillance of their communications, she discovered that they were conducting a systematic search of all foreign nationals in the city, including the journalists who might have access to sensitive information. Rather than simply hiding until her extraction, Sarah made a characteristically bold decision. She used the final hours of her mission to gather crucial intelligence about an imminent terrorist attack that her earlier work had only hinted at. Despite the extreme personal risk, she attended one final meeting where she confirmed the details of a planned bombing that would have killed hundreds of innocent civilians. The intelligence Sarah gathered during those final dangerous hours allowed American and Allied forces to prevent the attack and capture the remaining members of the terrorist cell. Her actions likely saved hundreds of lives, but they also required her to expose herself to extreme danger when the safest course would have been to remain hidden until extraction. When Sarah finally reached safety and was debriefed about her undercover mission, her superiors were amazed by both the quality of intelligence she had gathered and the risks she had taken to complete her mission. The operation was considered one of the most successful intelligence-gathering missions in recent history, and Sarah's role was recognized with her third major commendation. By this point in her career, Sarah had earned the respect of the intelligence community's most senior leaders. General Patricia Hayes, who oversaw all Army intelligence operations, personally met with Sarah to discuss her future career prospects and the advanced training opportunities available to exceptional young officers. Martinez, "Your record is remarkable," General Hayes said during their private meeting. "In 5 years of military service, you've distinguished yourself in ways that typically take decades to achieve. We have special programs for officers like you, assignments that would put you at the forefront of protecting American interests around the world." Sarah listened carefully as General Hayes described opportunities. That sounded like something from a spy novel. She could continue advancing through the intelligence community, eventually reaching positions where she would help shape national security policy. Alternatively, she could pursue specialized training that would prepare her for the most challenging and dangerous missions the military conducted. The conversation with General Hayes forced Sarah to consider what she truly wanted from her military career. She had already proven herself far beyond anything she had imagined when she first enlisted as a teenager. Her family was immensely proud of her achievements, and she could continue advancing through the ranks toward positions of significant responsibility and influence. But Sarah also recognized that her greatest satisfaction came from the direct action missions where her intelligence work had immediate life-saving impact. The desk jobs and policy positions that came with higher rank appealed to her intellectually, but they would take her away from the hands-on work that had defined her military experience. After careful consideration, Sarah chose a path that surprised many of her superiors. Rather than accepting promotion to positions that would take her away from operational assignments, she requested transfer to specialized units that conducted the military's most challenging missions. She wanted to continue serving where her unique combination of intelligence, skills, and combat experience could have the greatest impact. This decision led to Sarah's assignment to a joint special operations unit that conducted missions in multiple theaters simultaneously. Her role combined intelligence analysis, direct action, and training responsibilities that kept her at the center of the most important military operations worldwide. As word of Sarah's career choices spread through the military community, she became something of a legend among younger soldiers. Here was someone who had risen through the ranks with unprecedented speed, but had chosen to remain close to the action rather than retreating to the safety and prestige of senior staff positions. Coming home with 5 Purple Hearts, the final mission of Sarah's second deployment began like many others, with intelligence indicating a high-value target in a remote location where American forces had been taking casualties for months. But this operation would be different from anything Sarah had experienced before, ultimately earning her the 5th Purple Heart that would make her one of the most decorated young soldiers in Army history. The target was a bomb maker whose improvised explosive devices had killed dozens of American and Allied soldiers over the past year. His location had been identified in a fortified compound in one of the most dangerous regions of the country, surrounded by loyal fighters and protected by an extensive network of hidden explosives. Sarah's role in the mission was to provide intelligence support from a forward observation post while Special Operations Forces conducted the assault. Her position would give her a clear view of the target area and allow her to coordinate air support and monitor enemy communications throughout the operation. The observation post was located on a rocky hillside, approximately 1 kilometer from the target compound. Sarah and 3 other soldiers, Sergeant Mike Chen, Corporal David Rodriguez, and Specialist Amanda Foster, established their position under cover of darkness, carrying sophisticated surveillance equipment that would allow them to support the main assault force. As dawn broke over the mountainous terrain, Sarah began her systematic surveillance of the target area. Through high-powered optics and electronic monitoring equipment, she identified guard positions, communication patterns, and defensive preparations that would be crucial for the assault team's success. Command. This is Overwatch, Sarah transmitted to the assault force commander. I count 12 enemy fighters in visible positions around the compound, with probable additional forces inside the main building. They appear to be on high alert. Someone may have compromised our approach. The assault began at 600 hours with helicopter gunships engaging the compound's outer defenses. Sarah provided real-time target information, guiding the aircraft's weapons against enemy positions while tracking the movement of fighters trying to reinforce the compound's defenses. For the first hour of the operation, everything proceeded according to plan. The assault force successfully breached the compound's outer perimeter and was advancing on the main building where the bomb maker was believed to be hiding. Sarah's intelligence updates helped them avoid several improvised explosive devices and identify additional enemy positions. But as the assault force prepared to enter the main building, Sarah detected radio communications indicating that enemy reinforcements were approaching from multiple directions. Large numbers of fighters were converging on the compound, far more than intelligence estimates had predicted. Command, be advised you have significant enemy reinforcements approaching from the north and east. Sarah transmitted urgently. I count at least 30 additional fighters moving to surround your position. Recommend immediate extraction once the primary target is secured. The situation deteriorated rapidly as enemy forces began attacking the observation post itself. Sarah realized that their position had been identified, and that enemy fighters were moving to eliminate the American surveillance team that was providing crucial support to the assault force. Overwatch is taking fire, Sergeant Chen reported as bullets began striking the rocks around their position. Multiple enemy fighters approaching from the south and west. We need immediate support. Sarah and her team found themselves in a desperate firefight against overwhelming odds. Enemy fighters were attacking from 3 directions, using the rocky terrain to advance while remaining partially concealed from the Americans' defensive fire. The 4 soldiers were completely surrounded with no possibility of retreat. Despite the desperate situation, Sarah continued providing intelligence support to the assault force while engaging enemy fighters with her rifle. Her ability to multitask under extreme pressure allowed her to coordinate air support for both the main mission and her own team's defensive position. Air support inbound to your position, the helicopter pilot reported. Mark your position with smoke and take cover. Sarah threw a smoke grenade to mark their location while continuing to fire at advancing enemy fighters, who were now within 50 meters of their position. The helicopters' guns swept the area around the observation post, temporarily driving back the enemy assault. But Sarah could see additional fighters moving into position for another attack, and she knew her team's ammunition was running low after more than 2 hours of continuous fighting. During a brief lull in the fighting, an enemy sniper's bullet struck Sarah in the left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the rocky ground behind their defensive position. The impact knocked her unconscious for several minutes, and when she regained awareness, she could hear her teammates calling her name frantically. Martinez. Sarah, stay with us. Corporal Rodriguez was applying pressure to her wound, while Specialist Foster provided covering fire against renewed enemy attacks. Sarah struggled to focus through the pain and disorientation, but she could see that their situation was becoming hopeless. The assault force has secured the target and is extracting, Sergeant Chen reported over the radio. But we're still pinned down and taking heavy casualties. Martinez is wounded and we're running low on ammunition. Sarah forced herself to focus despite her injury. Through sheer determination, she managed to reach her radio and coordinate one final airstrike that would allow her team to break contact with the enemy forces. Her precise target information enabled the helicopter pilots to place their weapons danger close to the American position, eliminating the immediate threat. The extraction was harrowing, with enemy fighters continuing to engage the helicopters as they landed to pick up Sarah's team. She was lifted aboard while still conscious, clutching her rifle and trying to provide covering fire despite her wound and loss of blood. At the field hospital, doctors discovered that Sarah had suffered not only the gunshot wound to her shoulder, but also shrapnel injuries from multiple explosions throughout the day-long battle. Her injuries earned her a 4th Purple Heart to add to the 3 she had received during previous deployments and combat operations. But Sarah's military career was far from over. After recovering from her wounds, she returned to active duty and volunteered for another deployment. this time as a senior intelligence officer responsible for training and mentoring younger analysts. Her experience and reputation made her invaluable for preparing the next generation of military intelligence professionals. During her final deployment, Sarah was wounded one more time when the vehicle she was riding in struck an improvised explosive device during a routine convoy operation. Though her injuries were relatively minor, a concussion and cuts from flying debris, they resulted in her 5th Purple Heart, making her one of the youngest soldiers ever to receive so many awards for wounds received in combat. When Sarah finally returned home after 6 years of military service, she carried with her not only 5 Purple Hearts but also a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and numerous other commendations recognizing her exceptional service. The young woman who had once been dismissed as just a kid had become one of the most decorated soldiers of her generation. The homecoming ceremony in her hometown drew hundreds of people, including many who remembered Sarah as the small teenager who had insisted she was tough enough for military service. Commander Thompson was there, having requested permission to participate in the ceremony honoring the soldier whose potential he had so badly underestimated years earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Thompson said as he addressed the crowd, "I stand before you today to acknowledge one of the most remarkable soldiers I have ever had the privilege to know. When Sarah Martinez first told me about her military ambitions, I made the mistake of judging her by her appearance rather than her character. Today she returns home as proof that courage, determination, and patriotism are not determined by size, age, or gender, but by the content of one's heart." As Sarah stood before the crowd in her dress uniform, the ribbons on her chest telling the story of her extraordinary service, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared teenager who had enlisted to prove herself had become a confident leader, whose example would inspire others for years to come. Her grandfather, now using a wheelchair but still proud and dignified, watched from the front row with tears in his eyes. The family military tradition he had started decades earlier in Vietnam had reached heights he had never imagined possible. Sarah had not only served with distinction, but had proven that the next generation was ready to carry forward the values of service, sacrifice, and courage that defined the best of American military tradition. In the years that followed, Sarah would often return to speak at military recruiting events and leadership conferences. Her story became a powerful reminder that potential comes in many forms, and that the measure of a soldier is not found in their physical appearance but in their willingness to serve something greater than themselves, regardless of the personal cost.